This is professional show business. We're here with George Webb live from some mysterious location in Europe. How are you, George?
I'm great. I'm not far from the European Space Agency headquarters. And that's all I can say. It's Googled out. It's blacked out on the maps. So
is that because aliens land there or something? Is that an alien? Is that an alien meet point?
Somebody, some fan of the X-Files, talked to me today about the earliest days of X-Files, and I said I knew the guy who did their website, and they were it was a French person. They were so impressed. So, but I was going by where the rockets are made here in France, and it's called Les Mureaux, Mureaux, and then I was at the European Space Agency earlier, which is near a place called the Tower Montparnasse, and I'm doing a lot of research on Task Force, my old research partner's theory or conspiracy theory, or maybe she was right dead on. That hypothesis, yes, working theory, that the European Space Agency was actually funding bioagent development, and that money was being siphoned off of the European space program, which is famous for cost overruns for these NATO bioagents. So that's why I'm going where I'm going. There you have it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you say that too, because this may sound like non sequitur, but Dark Journalist, who's one of the featured people on the Duke Report, has a ongoing series called X steganography, because he's got this hypothesis that all of these projects that are called X this and X that, would like that, the X-15, for example, that the X somehow signifies some technology that has been secreted away, that has now been revealed in some way. There's lots of different hypotheses about whether it's Nazi technology or alien technology or Illuminati technology, whatever it is. But it was interesting because I was reading I was finishing Matthew Ehret's book on the I'm always spacing the name of his trilogy, but the end of the first volume, and it turned out that there was it Francis Galton? There was actually an X society in 1865 in Great Britain, and the Malthusians, the eugenicists, were all members of this X society. So I was wondering, I started thinking, we think of my frame for thinking of the X steganography has been, it's Nazi stuff, but maybe it's older. Maybe it goes back to London. Who knows?
Well, yeah, there was this big disease X and also Congo Crimea hemorrhagic fever, super big conference in October 2019. This time we have the breakout of coronavirus, disease X, they called it.
Disease X.
Yes.
Interesting.
Disease X, unknown. And Virginia Benassi also at the WHO found a new novel coronavirus in 2009, which exhibited shortage of platelets. There you go. Which was called thrombocytopenia, and then also severe fever like Congo Crimea hemorrhagic fever. So it's just interesting. You have all these things that never ever get out, like monkeypox, all of a sudden all getting out simultaneously. But yeah, the X steganography, I mean, if you look at some of the stuff Joseph Farrell does, not the alien stuff, but the stuff of the fall of the Soviet Union and the receipts, the papers, you see a lot of this idea of, hey, we'll shelter and hide bioweapons programs inside the space program, because only a few people are allowed to know about it. So that gives you operational security. and cost overruns. Well, it's never been done before, so you can just, spend to your heart's content. And so there is some, I do see some logic here.
Yeah,
I don't.
and that also dovetails with Catherine Austin Fitz's hypothesis that that the $6 trillion that she found missing in 1996, whenever she was at HUD, she thought that it had been funneled through what she calls the space program. And she didn't really know where the money went, but she thought that it went through the space program to someplace else.
Yeah, and I saw she did a show with the Dark Journalist, and she's a great one for following the money. I got a chance to meet her just briefly, and we didn't get a chance to connect long enough, so I'd love to talk to her more when we were in Geneva at the end of this press conference. But she's a great one for following the money, and I think that's the name of the game.
I mean, that was her money. I mean, that was her entree into the whole thing. She was the head of finance for HUD under George Herbert Walker Bush. And she just got in there and started doing the books and noticing, hey, there's trillions of dollars missing. And when she started mentioning it to people, they got very upset at her.
Yeah, and I think she was right about, like I say, the space program is a total one-off. Nobody's ever done it before, so there's no comparison. Like, no accountant can go, oh, you guys were just here last week for a Mars lifter, and it was only $2 billion, and now this week you're asking for $3 billion. No, all these projects are the first time ever. So
right.
there's no limit on the budgets, and you can hide a lot of stuff in there. And I think she's right. There is a lot of stuff hidden in this, especially in the space program. I know Task Force had a lot of people she talked to, and she just believed this, like reading the New York Times. I mean, that this is Fort Belvoir. These guys are putting it all into this dark weapons. I was working on the small nuclear reactors at Fort Belvoir. She was like, no, Fort Detrick, Fort Belvoir. So I think Farrell had done a lot of work with the old Soviet Union, with the receipts and the scientists and so forth. And Mark Kulak has done a lot of great work with the old Nazi guys going to the United States, Plum Island, and to Iowa and other stuff. So there is a way of tracking this, either through the money or the programs or the people. And that's really what we got to do. Annie Jacobson wrote a great book as well. So we're talking about the Duke Report, everybody. If you're not familiar with the Duke Report, it is the one-stop shop for great investigative journalism, and it's our last hope if they cut the internet.
Well, yeah. Well, if they, it's the one place that you can go where sources that are getting banned and shadow banned and basically censored all over the internet, where you can go find them, because I'm aggregating them all together, and that's where they are. The featured article today is a bit of a laugh. I try to think, things are kind of oppressive and scary lately, that every once in a while you need to laugh. And so there was this executive, the CEO of Amazon in Mexico, and apparently he hired a hitman to kill his wife. And they caught the hitman, and then the hitman started telling the police who hired him. But that led to a story that's written here by Steve Saylor, who's another guy who lives in Los Angeles. I still have to meet Steve Saylor, where he started hypothesizing, well, what if you could get a hitman in Amazon? What would a hitman at Costco look like? And what about the Walmart version, or and so he basically does a breakdown of all of the different kinds of hitmen that you can get. Now Ross Ulbricht is sitting in prison right now because the FBI claimed that he tried to do this in real life. I'm not sure that he did, but he's in prison nonetheless. And so I thought it was funny for Steve Saylor. Instead of building a website where you could hire a hitman, he just wrote a story about it, and it's
Well,
pretty.
that's pretty funny. And I for one, want to register that if a hitman did shoot Bezos, it should at least be a misdemeanor. That should at least be something that they have to do, like work release for, cleaning public, because nobody should ever get off scot-free for, hitting one of these elites. I think, a series of windows
or their wives.
Series
I think it's interesting. Jeff Bezos is his main squeeze now. His girlfriend that caused the breakup of his marriage. She is a helicopter pilot. And I was thinking, if you ever wanted to not crash in a helicopter crash, then you would make sure that your pilot was your significant other, right?
Ouch. Wow. Wow. It's going to be that easy. Just hit the ejector button. Is that going to be that simple? Well, that's a scary thought. That's chilling.
I don't know. I go out to the bluffs. You know where the bluffs are in front of my house, and around in the morning, you see these little Robinson helicopters flying up and down the coast, and in the afternoon, you see them flying up and down the coast. And I'm pretty sure that they're like picking up oligarchs in Malibu and taking them to work in Beverly Hills. So
well, you're in a space there where you can kind of see it all, and you can't fly directly over the neighborhood, but they fly by you over there at eye level. And, you can almost see into the copters, with Tom Cruise and whatnot going by. So this is startling.
I used to hear Tom Cruise on Saturday mornings in his Mustang. You knew it was Saturday because there was a Mustang buzzing the Palisades, and I'm pretty sure it was Tom Cruise.
Well, I remember what you said about. I think you said in your barbershop there. I think Bruce Willis loved to go to the barbershop there in Pacific Palisades. I can't remember who else.
Yeah, Bruce Willis. Yeah, Bruce Willis used to sit in the chair in the front. And one day I was walking by, and Michael Keaton was sitting at the barbershop was next to a tiny little cafe called Angela's, and Michael Keaton was sitting there and there was one small French cafe table with two chairs in front of Angela's, and Michael Keaton was sitting there reading the New York Times, and Bruce Willis was getting his hair cut. And I thought, only in the Palisades. I took my daughter to this Mexican restaurant, Kay and Dave's. And as we were walking in, she was about, I want to say 4.5 years old. And my mother had given her like this pink furry, it looked like a fur coat, but it was fake fur. And she was wearing this pink fur coat. And as we walked into Kay and Dave's, Tom Hanks was walking out, and he opened the door and he said, "Come on in, little lady." And he said, and Katie was very excited by the fact that he called her a little lady, but she didn't recognize that it was Woody from Toy Story that had let her in the restaurant.
Well, I tell you, Tom Hanks is, I think the cool thing about spending the time I have with you in the Palisades is everything. People have this kind of knowledge to not be a fan. It's like,
yeah. Here's a pro tip for people. If you ever meet a celebrity and you don't know what to say, instead of saying you love them or I'm a big fan, don't say that. Say this: I really like your work. If you say I really like your work, the shield will come down. Okay. If you start talking about their work and you separate what they do from who they are, then there's a good chance you'll have a conversation with them. If you tell them, "Oh, I loved you in this movie," blah, 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 like they're going to go, "Oh, okay, great. See ya. Thanks. Bye."
Yeah, it is. I met some very well-known people down there, and it is kind of a cool factor where you just kind of go, I see you, but I'm not going to bug you. Just you can keep eating your food and at dinner or whatever. And that's one cool thing about where you are, Peter, and a lot of great creative people, you know, mix all the time, which is really kind of cool. And I wish more of them were on our team like you. I guess that's my only thing about LA when I'm there is you know, or San Diego or, you know, Beverly Hills or wherever. I just go, man, everybody is against us. It's like, this is really uphill battle.
Yeah, I mean, I was a member of a super secret organization called FOA that was killed basically by two people who I won't name here, but basically the guy who ran FOA and his business partner, who are very famous in the conservative media world. You know, Trump won and they didn't want to continue that organization because they were, I don't know, they didn't like Trump or they were mad. They've got all kinds of excuses for why they did it. But there was a group of about 2,500 conservatives. And again, I put everything in those air quotes now because I don't even know what that means anymore. I mean, I think that, you know, I've talked about it before that C. Wright Mills in 1957 was calling out the fact that Americans are basically a conservative country, but the values that they're trying to conserve are liberal. So life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all men are created equal. And that between the media and mostly the media, but the politicians go along with it, it's created this kind of confusopoly where you call somebody a conservative and they actually have more in line. Their thinking is probably more in line with, you know, what people who would call themselves libertarians or something like that. So FOA was a group, Friends of Abe was a group of people that got together. Mostly we got together once a month at a bar in West Los Angeles. It was founded by Andrew Breitbart. And there was a large group of us that got together and we knew who each other were. But, you know, when we met at the super secret bar once a month, you know, we didn't have to edit ourselves as far as the conversations are concerned. And then we would all go back to work, and then people would, you know, put their mask on and continue to be able to work. I mean, I still have friends to this day who, you know, my friends that I do street art with, they don't want anyone to know who they are. That's why when we do it, I'm the only person who's not anonymous when we do it, because those people are still working and they want to keep working.
Yeah, I seem to remember a sign somewhere on 405 that a very large Trump sign, but I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we won't talk about that.
Well, I mean, we can. That project was a year in the making, but we could talk about whatever you want. We could talk about France, how's France, or we could talk about the Duke Report.
Well, intersection of the two. I always try to do that intersection thing. Are you following any authors lately? New, exciting authors? I mean, I know a lot of your authors. I'm one of them still.
Yes.
I'm still honored to be on the Duke Report. But what's the juice lately? What's the hot stuff?
Well, like I said earlier, I just finished the first. I'm sad because Matthew Ehret has this trilogy, and I always space the name. And I just finished the first volume. I have the written ones, but I prefer to do audiobooks. I like listening to things. And so I just finished the first book, and I was, and that's where I found the steganography story. Was in the last 4 or 5 pages of that book, and I really want to read the second volume of the book, and it's not available in an audio version, so I'm going to have to go back, and I'm going to have to switch to guns like Top Gun and actually read the darn thing. But what I like about listening to books is that I can multitask. Like I can get on my bike and ride, or I can go to the gym. I can do stuff like that. Stuff that doesn't require thinking. Okay, so let's go to Matthew Ehret here, and then I will tell you what the name of the series and the second volume is. It's the Clash of the Two Americas. And I just finished the Unfinished Symphony, and I'm about to start Open and Closed, Open versus Closed Systems Collide. In the first book, it's fascinating because he really goes into the kind of the politics of I would say the 1840s to the 1890s, which is not something that, a lot of people, you hear about the Civil War and you hear about Reconstruction and stuff like that, but he really tells it from this Canadian-British point of view that I've never heard before. And his contention in this book is that the British never wanted to let go of the United States, that they were running a Secret Service organization for the Confederacy out of Montreal, that Lee Harvey Oswald, that who killed Lincoln?
John Wilkes Booth.
Another three-named assassin, John Wilkes Booth. Yeah, John Wilkes Booth had come to Washington, D.C. just directly from Montreal, and he had a $500 check in his possessions that was drafted on a Canadian bank. And so there's all kinds of intrigue. He goes into Tsar Alexander II and how Tsar Alexander II basically sent fleets to the Pacific to I think San Francisco and New York Harbor, or maybe farther south, basically to let the British know that if they wanted to actively participate in the war with the Confederates, that they were going to have to deal with the Russians, and that there was all kinds of international intrigue around what Erret, the frame that he uses, which I've never heard anyone use before, is that there is the American system, which is basically a government that supports individual freedom and individual sovereignty. And then there's the British Empire system, which is this top-down, call it fascist, totalitarian, whatever it is that you want to call it, and that really the global conflict that we've got right now is between these oligarchs that are trying to support the American system, which they don't seem to be winning at this moment, versus these oligarchs that are trying to create this totalitarian globalist system. And he brings the receipts in the books. There's a lot of people quoted, and there's a lot of names that I've never heard before, but it's fascinating and interesting, and it really kind of changes my frame a little bit, which is why I looked at the X on there, and I was thinking, X steganography, is this something that goes way back to the 1860s? So the short answer is I've been reading Matthew Ehret's books.
Well, he certainly is an interesting author, and he does a great job of kind of what I call broad sweep of history type of books, connect the dots. I know John O'Loughlin has talked a lot with Harley Schlanger about the British banking system, and John's talked a lot about, the British, concentrated on the ports, and the Americans concentrated on infrastructure, railroads, building in rather than, projecting power from the ports. And I always thought those were two interesting systems. And I do think that there is a battle between those systems, with, unfortunately, drugs being a big part of the British system.
Right.
British East India Company, Dutch East India Company, Henry Kissinger, and so forth. And I, part of being here in France is kind of running down the French connection, which is start with the French in Vietnam and failing and losing their drug routes to Europe, and then the Americans, with the help of Henry Kissinger and Klaus Schwab, kind of recovering those drug routes, and sort of the French Connection type thing. And that is still, it seems to be still kind of this. I don't know if it's Knights of Malta or whatever it is in southern France, but I've been told they've kind of settled in Carcassonne, France, once they were booted out of Paris. But this does kind of give you a perspective, a European perspective, that you don't get with Henry Kissinger. Most people don't know Kissinger goes to Vietnam in '63. He's given carte blanche as a 28-year-old professor from Harvard. He's in all these diplomatic meetings. Oh, wait a minute. He was right there with Reinhard Gehlen and Allen Dulles after World War II in Oberammergau, trying to get Nazis out of Germany into Switzerland. Klaus Schwab's father being in Ravensburg, being the kind of the first stop on the Rat Line Highway for these escaping Nazis. So I'm really trying to run down these old Nazi rat lines right now here in Europe, and
well, there's a lot of fascinating stuff. Like, de Gaulle wasn't de Gaulle? Didn't Allen Dulles have a giant crosshair on de Gaulle? Wasn't that all of those attempts on his life? Those all seem to be either OSS or CIA kind of inspired. That you've got the revolt in Algeria of the French generals. There was a famous movie, I think Z, that was made about that, which I saw when I was a little kid. I didn't really understand it because, again, the framing of the French has always been interesting. Fletcher Prouty kind of famously told the story about being in Okinawa on the last day of the war, and they had all of the materiel there that was being staged for the invasion of Japan. And he asked the quartermaster whether or not they were going to send all this stuff back, and he said, "Oh no, we're sending half of it to Hanoi and the other half to Seoul." So, like, and then when Dien Bien, and then was it Bissell who was with Ho Chi Minh when he gave his famous Declaration of Independence speech in Vietnam, where he modeled the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence after the American Declaration of Independence, and the Americans were aligned with the Vietnamese, I guess, anti-colonials at that time. And then
I want to say that's A Man for All Seasons, or not A Man for All Seasons, but there was a book written about like a Colby type character that was working special forces that was with Ho Chi Minh when he said that. But continue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I don't remember. I get all those non marquee CIA operators confused, but it was only a couple of years later that the Americans decided, the French are complaining because we're supporting this Ho Chi Minh guy. We better support the French instead. And then, but that material that Fletcher Prouty was talking about, specifically the 155 millimeter howitzers, were the weapons that were used to destroy the French at Dien Bien Phu, because I think the French had like 120 millimeter howitzers, and the American 155 millimeter howitzers outranged them. So they basically pulled their howitzers outside the range of the French, and then they just rained shells down on them until they obliterated them. That was American materiel that was given to Ho Chi Minh. So it's very confusing trying to keep up with the French-American relationship right after the end of World War II.
There was a book called like Some CIA Operative in Vietnam, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was kind of like A Man Called Intrepid, like this William Stevenson book for OSS. But William Holbrook, Richard Holbrook was the guy who comes to mind, who's in the kind of the ambassador at that time to Vietnam, and all of a sudden this 28-year-old Harvard professor comes in, like in '53, with Kissinger, right. And they're like, "Who are you?" And it's like, "No, I'm here to advise the Bronfman interests here in Vietnam, and you know what those interests are." So I think there's a long path here to the end of World War II to right to now. Klaus Schwab's dad, now to Klaus Schwab, being the top Nazi contractor for Hitler, Klaus Schwab's dad, now to Klaus Schwab being the top Nazi in the world, taking over the world. But if you really get down to Reinhard Gehlen meeting with Alan Dulles, OSS, meetings in Switzerland, meetings with Wolf, who was the top guy at the Nazis.
And didn't he start meeting with Dulles in 44? Like the war was
March 44.
Yeah.
That's why I went to D-Day. That's why I'm wearing a 101 right now, because what we were looking at was the whole D-Day sort of a controlled op to get these Nazis out of Germany into the United States. It's sort of like the Rockefellers recovering their intellectual property. And we actually went to Kermit Washington, who was Kermit Roosevelt. Kermit Roosevelt, who was the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, and we went to his beach. He was with the 101. Maxwell Taylor, who is the guy who was in Kennedy's cabinet, CIA. And we've looked into these new places where Nazi higher ups were being hidden by Rommel in Army Group West. They were also doing war games at the same time.
Is that the chateau that you were at? Because there was there was a chateau where Speidel, who was the chief of staff for Rommel, and Rommel had their headquarters.
We went to St. Lo. We went to the headquarters. We spent a lot of time in St. Lo, but there was a forward bunker that just been unearthed in a place called it looks like Grand Champs, but it's Grand Champ, or Grand Champ, which is big field.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent a lot of time down there looking at how is Teddy Roosevelt, the grandson, here, and how is this battery here? It wasn't taken over in the first 2 days. There seemed to be a lot of prisoner interchange there. And then if you look at the 101, again, here's the Screaming Eagle. They're at Market Garden, where you seem to have an exchange in Eindhoven and Nijmegen. Again, a failed operation as a cover story. Then you follow the 101 to Battle of the Bulge, and then again you seem to have these dark weapons guys. The nuclear guys seem to be exchanged right after David Talbot in Devil's Chessboard talks about the March 44 meetings between Dulles and Gehlen.
Yeah.
So, but it seems like they get the nuke guys out first, and then they start working on the bio guys later on. That's when Donald Barr is meeting a couple of writers that go on to be pretty famous, Kurt Vonnegut and J.D. Salinger, who just happen to be in American intelligence and captured, that go to a place where the German bioweapons program was located near Dresden. And it gets carpet bombed.
And I've heard you hypothesize that before. Is that backed up by anything? Are there any books, or is there any evidence that?
Well, it's backed up by Schlachthof 5, which is Slaughterhouse 5, is certainly the place where a lot of animal experiments were done by Mengele and the other Kurt Blom and Eric Traub, taking the animal weapons of World War I and trying to move them to humans. I.G. Farben is well documented by a whole bunch of different people that they tried to move these animal weapons from World War I to humans. And then Jim Marrs documents in Rise of the Fourth Reich how the son, Martin Bormann's son, goes to Congo, and that's where they try to start for the diseases they can't move directly from horses to humans. They use monkeys as an intermediary in these green monkey experiments. A lot of people think that's where HIV comes from. A lot of people think that's where a lot of these cancers come from, and a lot of these idiosyncratic diseases come from. And it makes a lot more sense than zoonotic, a bat. It makes a lot more sense when people are actively using syringes in the thousands and doing thousands and thousands of experiments, rather than saying a bat flew 2,000 miles to a fish market in Wuhan, right, where they're not sold, and that's how it all started.
Yeah. On a lighter note, one of the things I wanted to mention was I think it's in the Rommel papers. I read a bunch of books on Erwin Rommel at one point. I was thinking about writing a screenplay on him, and at the end of the day, I just decided I didn't really like him that much to want to write about him. But I did read a lot about him, and it's interesting because shortly before the invasion of Normandy, he and Speidel used to sit on the roof of a chateau near wherever it is that you were, and they would practice. They were learning English by reading the book Gone with the Wind to each other. So they would take turns reading paragraphs from Gone with the Wind, which I thought was this is completely non sequitur, but interesting thing.
Well, interesting that you mentioned that, because it's very close where that their headquarters was in Saint-Lô to a National Equestrian Center, which was gigantic. It still is the National Equestrian Center of France, and it reminds me so much of Patton and his love of Lipizzan or stallions in Vienna, Austria. But there was 3 or 4 years. I can't remember when they move. I can't remember when Hitler moves Rommel out of the Africa Corps to the Atlantic Wall, but I think it's early 44.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Rommel thing is so interesting to me. I mean, it's part of the reason that I dug into it so deeply, and because I really so the war starts for in earnest in France, right? Poland was like a little police action compared to France, and then Africa and Russia, and so Rommel was the head of. So first of all, he wrote a book. So Rommel wrote a book called "The Infanterieangriff on," the infantry in attack, which was mislabeled "Armor in Attack" in the movie Patton. I don't understand why, but he tells a story about how he was ordered in Italy to capture a hilltop position, and he was promised that if he captured it, that he would win the illustrious medal called the Pour le Mérite. And he captured the hill, but while he was setting up his defenses, somebody else, another lieutenant, ran down the hill and claimed that he captured it, and that guy won the Pour le Mérite. So then Rommel spent the rest of the war trying to do something. He eventually did something where he actually won the award, but he basically, it was stolen. The first one was stolen from him. And he wrote a book about it. And that book went on sale, I think, on or about the same time that Mein Kampf went on sale. And I don't think that Hitler ever outsold Rommel. That is, I think that Infanterieangriff on was sold more copies than Mein Kampf. And so Rommel wound up becoming, when the World War I ended, Rommel had been, he was one of the few that was kept in the army because the German army was reduced to 100,000. He was an instructor because of, the valor and the fact that he had won this award. And then he became the head of Hitler's, basically his protection unit. It was a small unit with 250 men, and they were in charge of protecting Hitler during the invasion of Poland. And so Rommel had very close proximity to Hitler for about 6 weeks, and he convinced Hitler to give him an armored division. He had never been in a tank in his life, so they gave him this division that was cobbled together out of equipment that had been captured from the Czechs. And it was like a lot of old, like Panzer Is, Panzer IIs, which were the earliest and least effective armored vehicles that the Germans had. And then a bunch of, I think they were can't remember the designation of the Czech tanks, but the Czechs actually made really good tanks. And so he, along with Heinz Guderian, were the Schwerpunkt. They were the tip of the Blitzkrieg. So the way that World War II started in France is that the Germans invaded the lowlands. They invaded, which is hard to visualize because it's the lowlands, but it's really up here. It's Belgium and Holland. He went in through Belgium and Holland because the Germans knew that the British and the French had this plan called Plan D, which stood for the Dial River, and the British and the French quickly ran across the Dutch border or the Belgian border, and they made it to the Dial River where they lined up. And just when they were digging in, then Guderian and Rommel came through the Ardennes, and then they drove all the way to the coast and ended the war, quite quickly. When that happened, Goebbels had an assistant named Schmundt, who was one of the people who got killed in the bomb attack, trying to kill Hitler. And Schmundt was very taken with Rommel. He thought that he was a very charismatic guy, and he thought that he had great showbiz appeal. And they made a movie about Rommel called Victory in the West, and it starred his 7th Armored Division, and there was all kinds of lore that was kind of propaganda that was put out. They called it the Ghost Division because the French never knew where it was going to show up, and Rommel very quickly became like a matinee star. In a way, he was kind of like the Madonna of the Third Reich, and Hitler didn't like it. Hitler didn't like the fact, and the Allies knew that Hitler didn't like it, and they wound up putting him on the cover of I think Time magazine, which I have a copy of someplace. And so Rommel got sent to, I think he got sent to Africa basically to have his ass handed to him. Like, he wasn't given enough resources. He wasn't given what he needed in order to beat the British. He was just given enough stuff to become a nuisance for the British. But he kept kicking their butts regardless, by kind of thinking outside of the box. So Rommel's a very interesting guy. And then, after he left, after ultimately the Germans were defeated in North Africa because of intelligence, because the Enigma people had broken the codes, and they actually knew which ships to bomb when they were sending supplies to North Africa. So Rommel was pulled out of North Africa when Patton famously fought Rommel in the movie Patton. Rommel wasn't even there. He hadn't been there for months, and they kind of put him on ice for a while. Again, I think that the major reason that he was put on ice is because he was too popular. Like, he was kind of like George Patton in a way. He was a big threat, and in fact, I believe that if you take a look at what was going on with American intelligence, producer Carrie just pulled it out. There it is. Time magazine. I don't even know where it was, but producer Carrie knew where it was. So anyway, he was on ice for a long time, and then they, kind of put him in charge of the Western Wall, kind of the same way that they put Patton in charge of there was a non-army in England. So before D-Day, George Patton was sent off to Wales or something with 1,000 inflatable tanks, and they were always doing press releases, and they were using his kind of like over the top personality to kind of like leak stories about this secret army that he had that didn't really exist. So it's very interesting, kind of like the personalities of these guys and how they wind up being. MacArthur, likewise, like he was kind of so mad at Truman that he wanted to come back and run for president, and Truman fired him. it's very interesting dynamic. You know, generals do become presidents sometimes, right? Grant, Eisenhower, you know, George Washington. They were all generals, right?
It's happened.
Yeah.
Well, I think Rommel is an interesting character, and there is this ability for the international press to make matinee idols. I think Mussolini might have been on the cover of Time 8 times. So like way beyond his actual, you know, influence in Italy as an international
Right,
matinee.
and at the same time that he was on all those magazine covers, that's when the Capitol was being remodeled, and you know, Abraham Lincoln has his hands on fasci, right, on the symbol of fascism. The cornices on all of the furniture in the House of Representatives are fasci on either side of the speaker's podium. There's fasci on the wall, so all of that was concurrent with Mussolini coming to power.
Well, yeah, I think there was kind of an underwhelming, maybe, of the Alan Dulles crowd with, you know, they were trying to get Smedley Butler on board and maybe doing a kind of a beer push of FDR. But what is clear is later on, FDR certainly was being, you know, everybody thinks, oh, the first president that was hoodwinked by Alan Dulles was Eisenhower. And then Kennedy, you know, the two first conspiracy theorists, Eisenhower conspiracy theorist number one, Kennedy number two. But no, it wasn't just him. It was also, he was also being hoodwinked and not to be being given all the information to Harry Truman. And before that, 1944, as you mentioned, the Tehran conference comes to mind at 43 with FDR making these doing daring raids to save SS generals, making sure that none of these SS generals were tried for war crimes at Nuremberg, fighting every step of the way for any kind of reprisals against the the SS hierarchy. This is Alan Dulles all through 44. So it's interesting. This is where I think there's some carryover between Time Magazine and the guy who ran Time Magazine publishing, whose name escapes me right off.
Let me look.
But anyway, he was very good friends with Alan Dulles, and Alan Dulles was creating these kind of fictitious. All of a sudden, I can't remember his name, but he had Time Magazine, Look Magazine.
Maybe somebody in chat will know.
Forbes. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name right now, but he was the big mouth organ for the CIA and the Alan Dulles. And so Dulles is creating these people as the players, as sort of David Talbot's chess pieces or Zbigniew Brzezinski's chess pieces.
Right.
Whether Hitler likes it or not, whether the Pope likes it or not in Italy, whether no matter who likes it, they create their own entities. Stalin also was on the cover of Time. Gosh, I can't remember the publisher right now of Time Magazine. He was the same guy who suppressed the Zapruder film and ended up dying of a heart attack after it finally got published.
I'm surprised. Yeah, I'm surprised Dan Rather didn't have a heart attack when it got published.
Yeah. Well, it starts with a P, and he suppressed. No, it wasn't Putnam. It wasn't Putnam. I'll think of it in a second.
Henry Luce.
Luce Publishing Organization. Okay. Yeah, and Luce basically has a heart attack when he finally publishes it because somebody, citizen journalist, looks at their frames and finds that, oopsie, you flipped the frames around in the report. You doctor the frames when you finally did publish this thing, which you had for years. You flipped the frames around, and he and Alan Dulles Luce were good buddies. And so Rommel, this is why I say Rommel is a key guy, and we have to look at Rommel now as maybe being an agent of Dulles and being, hey, we're going to save you. We're going to save this organization. We're going to save the Abwehr, which is the Nazi intelligence infrastructure. We're going to save the Schwarzstufel. We're going to save the key SS guys. We're going to save the key Gestapo guys, Mueller, Speer, all those guys that were in the war, wonder weapons, right? And we got to get them out. And we're going to do it by scaring the bejesus out of FDR. So the first thing we're going to do is, for the Manhattan Project, we want to beat, Hitler. Hitler's working on the Manhattan Project. You want to get the Nazi nuke scientists out first. This is why I'm looking at D-Day and looking at the Nazi scientists that came over in 44, mid 44. Now, the experiments, as far as the bio experiments in, Dachau, and I've been to all these different death camps, and they all kind of run together in your mind.
Treblinka.
But in Poland, Treblinka, but Auschwitz, there was these medical experiments that were Nordhausen, and also there was all these experiments going on, middle work, on these people, that they were running the bio experiments full tilt, even though they were trying to get the nuclear guys out. And remember, the Nazis controlled Hungary, which had Slazard or whatever, all these nuclear Hungarians. So, and Polish. So they're getting those guys out, but then they were running the bios full tilt until the Battle of the Bulge. Full tilt, trying to get stuff from the horse to the humans. So this is where I think the Battle of the Bulge becomes really important, because there's a big prisoner exchange there. And then finally the 101, right, goes to Eagle's Nest. They're the first unit that's there, sitting in Hitler's chairs up there in the Eagle's Nest, where Eva Braun used to play and dance, with Hitler and Goering and so forth. Again, they're the first ones there. This is why Bill Taylor, Maxwell Taylor, is an important character for me. I think Bill Taylor's a relative, because I have Bill Taylor, the person who runs the Trump campaign and so closely tied with Ukraine right now, friending the grandson of Maxwell Taylor. His name is Max Taylor, the grandson now. And this Bill Taylor that I either met with, or I met with a relative of his,
Blackberry Bill Taylor.
Blackberry Bill Taylor friended the grandson, Maxwell Taylor. So I know they're related. And I think this is a kind of a thing that you were talking about with Peter Strzok. There's the one thing you don't count on is this being a family business from generation to generation. So my hypothesis I'm working on, I don't have it all put together yet, but it's using the nuclear Nazis to get them out in 44, and then later on in 45 is where the bio Nazis start getting put out. But they don't want to wait for Nuremberg, because if you wait for the Allies to take over, these guys are going to get hung, and you lose all your investment.
Based on the things that I've read, my analysis of Rommel and the plot to overthrow Hitler is that, like I said, that Time magazine was running pictures of Rommel on the cover, and Dulles and Montgomery and all of those other guys were trying to figure out a way. I mean, they kind of touch upon it in the movie Patton a little bit, but there were a lot of people on the American side. So it's actually the British too, who believed that they had more in line with the Nazis than with the Russians, and that the Nazis were less of a threat than Russian communism. And in the movie, George C. Scott playing Patton famously says, we should just shake hands with these guys and turn around and go after them. It turns out that there were a lot of Germans who were actually thinking the same way, and Rommel's chief of staff, like I said, Hans Speidel. And I see all of these memes popping around the internet with Werner von Braun, in a Nazi uniform, and then Werner von Braun at NASA, and then somebody else from NATO. And I don't recognize all the names, but Hans Speidel, who was Rommel's chief of staff, he was directly involved in the organization of the plot to kill Hitler. And they wanted to install Rommel as the head of the government. And at one point, again, I don't remember which book I read it in. Speidel came to Rommel and started talking to him about this, and Rommel said, "Look, I don't want to know anything about this until it's done." So his basic, which seemed, again, if that's true, a little weak to me. It's kind of like you either turn the guy in or you go in with him, but you don't say, "Well, come back to me after you've taken care of it." It seemed like a kind of a weak move. But what's interesting is that after the assassination attempt on Hitler happened, Rommel fought very hard to get Speidel exonerated, even though he was as guilty as anybody who was really involved in the thing. Speidel, after the war, Rommel doesn't make it, right? So basically, Rommel gets Speidel released, but then the Gestapo comes and visits Rommel and says that Hitler doesn't trust him anymore, and that he can either die in his sleep or his entire family is going to get sent to a concentration camp. So that was how Rommel wound up killing himself. But after the war ended, Speidel wound up becoming the head of NATO. He became the senior commander in NATO.
Yeah, and this is why I think that Rommel and, of course, they're reading Gone with the Wind to each other, because they need to know English.
They need to learn how to speak English, yeah.
Fast, and like, how do you understand these people, from Fort Bragg, who are from the 82nd Airborne, and, from, Campbell, Kentucky, from the 101, how do you understand these Southerners? So I think that's what's going on, and Speidel takes over in Rommel's place. But I really believe, Army Group West, and from what I've seen, there was holes, there was revetments and secret bunkers left in Grand Massy or Grand Champ Massy that I think really need to be looked at with the fullness of time. Remember, the Nazis they weren't out there in front on nuclear technology, but they did have the maps in Africa. They did have control of Shinkolobwe, I believe, in Congo. They did have the maps of where the uranium was. They did have the oil maps in Tehran. They were trying to do a Middle East end around if they couldn't get the Caspian Sea oil. It's the same Kermit Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's grandson, that only 8 years later, overthrows Mossadegh and puts the Shah on the throne in Iran. And that's for the Imperial British Oil Company, which is BP. So I think there is a lot of economic interest, a lot of chips that could be picked up. And if you wait till the game is over, it's kind of like a cakewalk. You don't get the chips. Yep. But if you pick them up before the game's over, you get the chips. And I think that's where, and Rommel, I think, was, a really, really, really good soldier. And he realized Hitler was going to take Germany over the edge, where it was going to be total burnt, scorched earth policy, and everybody was going to get killed. And the Stauffenberg, the Project Valkyrie, I think July.
Rommel was so out of the loop that when Barbarossa happened, he heard about it in the news. Like he had no understanding or idea that the Wehrmacht was about to invade Russia. And he was in Africa, but he was, he was a general who was in charge of an entire theater of war, and he was completely out of the loop on that. Hey, George, I have a hard out. I've got to go do something. So how can people, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you can see that I've made part of our video the way that people can support you. So, but
that's a beautiful thing, Peter. And I would only add that for those who are only hearing us at Ships at Sea tonight and all over the world, if you're orbiting in the space station, and only can hear us by video or audio, it's GEOWEBB on Venmo, and of course It's on PayPal. It's George Sweigert. So that's the way you can support. And Peter, you would want to know if you're out at a tanker or some submarine under the polar ice caps, how would they support the Duke Report if they were out so disposed?
Well, if they could go to the Duke Report, and there's a link there that's a support, and they could buy me a coffee. Somebody bought me 5 coffees yesterday. Thank you. That was great. Or they can buy shirts on the Duke Report. And here's big news. This is a spoiler for all the people the 75 of you who have hung around until now. I bought the domain name Duke Report, which George, being from Miami of Ohio, will appreciate the fact that it was a Duke basketball website. And the guy who owned the domain name sold it to me. And so now, instead of getting Duke Blue Devil news, you will get the Duke Report news. If you go, it's faster if you type the Duke Report. But if you type Duke Report, you'll also get there.
Peter, I know you have to go, but in this few seconds we have left, the Queen of England actually is known as the Duke of Normandy. She still has control over the Channel Islands. I'm not just talking about Guernsey, not just talking about Jersey, but there's a couple of other islands there, and I can't remember their names. She still holds sway. And then never forget, the reason why we're still speaking English is because we had a resistance movement where, even though the Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, came over and took over our motherland in England and only spoke French, we kept our English. So just hang in there, folks. I know Klaus Schwab's depressing everybody. Seems like Hitler is in power, never will be overthrown. Keep speaking your English. Keep remembering your Shakespeare. And for gosh sake, go run out into the night and get a copy of Gone with the Wind. Be like Erwin Rommel
and read it with a Klaus Schwab accent.
Yes, read it with a Klaus Schwab accent.
Okay, where was the line that Thermonstable put up there? There we go. We need to do this in German. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. That's more Russian.
That's beautiful. No, that's beautiful. I wouldn't change a word.
Can you do that better in German, George? And then we can say that good night.
I could do it in the German accent. I don't care.
Yeah, do the German accent. Frankly, my dear,
I don't give a damn. That's Klaus Schwab. That's how he would say it.
Indeed.
So all right. Thanks, everybody. I'll do it in French next time, hopefully, and we'll see you next Thursday night. Thursday.
I'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.